Hello and welcome to Global Eye. The Prime Minister this week outlined his vision for a self-reliant or Atmanirbhar Bharat. The Prime Minister stressed on being vocal for local. He said that the Indian government would be rolling out a 20 lakh crore rupee package and a slew of reforms to make Indian products more competitive globally. The Prime Minister emphasized on 5 pillars to make India self-reliant: economy, infrastructure, systems, vibrant demography and demand. The Finance Ministry has announced credit support for MSMEs, food grain support for all migrants, one nation, one ration card, and an agriculture infrastructure fund. The Indian government has also been drawing out plans to lure companies to set up manufacturing in India. But what do foreign investors feel about India's strategy? Let's go across to Mukesh Aghi of the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. Mr. Aghi, thank you very much for joining us. Our first question: what do you make of these announcements, the kind of support that the Indian government is extending to MSMEs, to the urban poor, and also the Prime Minister's pitch for self-reliance?
I think it is important that India gets its economy revived again, both on the demand side and the supply side. And therefore, you need a very strong stimulus package. What we have seen is a good start. It is important to understand that 60% of the economy is consumption-based. So it is critical that the consumption is revived, at the same time making sure there's enough liquidity coming out in the market that also revives the economy, both from a supply and demand side. But more important is talking about be vocal about local. You have to understand every country has to have self-reliant on critical goods itself, be it healthcare, medicine, medical devices. And so I think the step taken by the Prime Minister is the right one. Are international companies concerned about that? I would say no, because what we're looking at is what U.S. companies do is definitely they're bringing a lot of critical supplies into the Indian economy, but they're also bringing global supply chain into the Indian economy. So India's export market picks up. So you have to keep on finding the balance itself as you look at being trying to be more local itself. But I think it's important to understand that when you look at such as high-tech manufacturing, you look at defense manufacturing, India has to partner with global companies to revive that. And finally, I'd like to add that if India is going to be a $5 trillion economy, if India is going to grow into 7 to 9%, it needs approximately $100 billion worth of FDI on an annual basis, and that can't stop. Otherwise, the economy will not pick up.
Right. Mr. Aghi, also when the Prime Minister speaks about self-reliance, the Indian government, the Ministry of Commerce, the MEA, they have been trying to lure foreign companies. We believe a list of 1,000 companies have been drawn up. But what would be needed to make India that choice for alternate manufacturing? Does that scenario exist in India currently?
I think the two global phenomena which are taking place, which has a positive impact of India. One is there's a stress point between US and China, and Chinese, US companies in China are exploring China plus one strategy. They will not abandon China completely, but they look at alternative sites to China. Now, India can play that role quite effectively. It has to compete with Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and even Bangladesh. So it's important that India benchmark its policies and ease of doing business with these countries, or to be better itself to attract. So that's one phenomenon. The second phenomenon is you have to understand India's purchasing power as time goes by will go up and up and up. And what we see is US companies and European companies are looking for market beyond China, and India plays that pivotal role as a potential growth market for these goods itself. So the combination of two, India becomes a very attractive market for these companies that come in and set up their manufacturing sites.
Right. But what kind of reforms does India need going forward? The Prime Minister wants India to play a bigger role, a more competitive role when it comes to supply chains. As far as manufacturing destinations of choice, countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, perhaps give a better platform to companies in the United States and other parts of the world. How can India compete with these economies, Mr. Agi?
Well, I think India can compete. If you look at on a services business, 46% of India exports are IT services, and they compete with world-class companies very effectively, very efficiently. And I see no reason why, if we put our energy into manufacturing side, as to why they can't compete on a global basis. What we have to do, beside looking at, we're talking about land reform, labor reform, we are seeing on a state basis, they're all stepping up. I think the most important thing is a sense of predictability in policy making, a sense of transparency in the whole process itself, making sure that these companies have level playing field and policies are not tuned to basically support one industry or one company against the other. I think that sense of level playing field, sense of transparency and predictability is important. And also it's important to have sanctity of the law itself. We had a lot of companies come in and invest in Andhra Pradesh, and when the government changed, suddenly all those investment in some way were canceled. And I think that sends the wrong message. So I think we have to have a uniformity in predictability. We have to uniformity in sanctity of the law. India has made a lot of progress, but I think if it's going to compete on a global basis, it has to raise the bar and benchmark itself with the other economies.
Right. Over the last 3-4 days, a slew of measures have been announced by the finance minister. More are in the pipeline as well. But do you feel that India urgently needs to work on the ease of doing business? The Commerce Minister has spoken about a single window clearance for companies wanting to set up manufacturing in India.
I think a devil is in details, and it's important that as we move forward, and I can say that in our discussion with the government of India, they have been very receptive, responsive, and have taken initiative to make a lot of changes, laws which are coming from the 18th and 19th century itself. So I think that's I have to compliment the government from that perspective, but we have a long way to go. I think it's important, we are looking at a behavior change, not just a legal change to the whole process. While the Delhi and the senior bureaucrats make every effort to ensure that the things change, it has to percolate down to the district level, to the city level, to the where these companies are going to set up manufacturing. And that is going to take some time. And it's important to understand that we have to give assurance to these companies. We have to give assurance to the board level that in a long term, India is going to be a strong player in the global market and a strong host for multinational companies who can invest and have a long-term return from the Indian geography.
But if we speak about US companies, there have been issues, market access issues that US companies have been facing, especially when it comes to data localization, e-commerce as well. Do you feel that the government's pitch for self-reliance and focusing on local, become vocal for local products, emphasizing on promoting local products, do you think somehow this contradicts our pitch for foreign investors to come and invest in the India growth story?
There will be somewhere some kind of a mixed messaging, but I think you have to understand if India's economy has to grow at a higher single digit, if India has to keep on creating 1 million jobs a month, it has to partner with global companies from an investment perspective, from an innovation perspective, and from a governance perspective. And it's important to understand that the pitch by the government is not trying, let's become isolationist. I think the pitch is, hey, let's become self-reliant in critical issues, but at the same time, let's go after the global market because we have a strong value proposition where we can compete and generate more jobs for the country.
Right. Mr. Agi, I'll request you to stay on with us. Richard Heald of UK India Business Council is joining us. Mr. Heald, how do you see the announcements that have been made by the Prime Minister, especially the emphasis on self-reliance? What do companies in the UK want as far as manufacturing goes? There is a lot of talk about de-risking, moving manufacturing out of China, or at least setting up alternate manufacturing chains. What will make India a preferred destination in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, well, I've been listening to the conversations that you've been having with Mukesh, and I have to say that I think a lot of the points that he's made are well made. As far as this statement by the Prime Minister earlier this week, I think that it's a very interesting nuance, if you like, and change to what you said previously. I think that it indicates an openness and a change which we welcome. Obviously, the UK is in an interesting position insofar as we have 800-odd companies in India of all sizes making, assembling, manufacturing. So we're already very, very much committed to India. I think that indigenization of supply chains is very important. And we would support that, and we have supported that. We've been engaged in this in the past weeks with very substantive conversations with DPIIT and other major organizations within the Indian government. And I have to say I've been very impressed at how responsive they have been in terms of the comments and recommendations that UK businesses have made in relation to stimulating or improving the operating environment in India at the present moment. So generally speaking, we're very, very welcoming of this contribution.
But are there UK companies who have approached you? Would you probably have a list of companies on the number of UK companies who've shown interest about shifting manufacturing chains, or at least exploring the possibility of moving them to India?
Well, we have multiple conversations, and at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is that if you are going to compete in the Indian market, you have to develop domestically. You have to develop indigenous supply chains, and that is something that is absolutely apparent, because if your competitor has 90% of its supply chain out of India, then and you have, let's say, 60%, then you're probably operating at a competitive disadvantage. So you have to look at developing that supply chain, and that comes in two ways. That comes in the form of finding suppliers who can supply you, but also at the level that you want that. And that's a long process.
Okay.
But nonetheless, it is something that we're operating on.
Right. Mr. Heel, we've run out of time, but thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank Mr. Aghi as well. We'll take a short break, but when we return, we'll keep talking about the India growth story, the Prime Minister's pitch for self-reliance, we'll continue that conversation with Junaid Ahmed, the country director of World Bank. Don't go anywhere. That special interview is coming up. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. The World Bank Board has announced an additional $1 billion in support for India's social security program. The World Bank has said that there cannot be a trade-off between lives and livelihood, and a comprehensive social security program, which includes both the rural and urban poor, can act as a safety bridge in these difficult times. The country director for World Bank in India also outlined how India can become more competitive in the supply chain and return to the growth path as well. I began by asking him about how this $1 billion fund for social security would be spent. Let's listen in.
First, I think it's important to remind ourselves of the logic of what's happening. The COVID crisis has led to an unprecedented engagement in the health sector. And I say unprecedented because we have introduced around the world, not only India, but governments around the world have introduced social distancing, which has led to a slowdown of the economy. Very rarely do you see governments engaging in an economy to slow it down in order to solve a problem. Usually it's a stimulus that one seeks immediately. But this slowdown has meant that there seems to be a trade-off between lives and livelihoods. And I think the social protection program is critical in saying that there is no issue, or there is not going to be a focus on a trade-off between lives and livelihoods, but to allow the poor and the vulnerable a bridge during this slowdown until the economy is revived. So the social protection is correctly the next sequence of the health intervention to ensure and protect the poor and the vulnerable. And that's, we're talking about 50% of the country's population. Now, coming to your question, what is the $1 billion that we're putting in the social protection? How does it link to government's existing programs? What is critical is I think we are at a watershed moment in the social protection framework of India. The social protection framework of India has been traditionally a very rural focused program. But today, COVID has revealed the fault lines of the system as it exists, as COVID is showing the fault lines of economic and social systems around the world. And the fault lines today are really defined around several parameters. How are migrants being supported in a social protection system? Second, how are the unorganized worker, the informal worker, 90% of India's workforce, how are they getting access to social protection? Third is how do you make this social protection system portable? How do you make it a pan-national one, not just focused on one specific location or very much a rural program? What the social protection system of India is now pivoting towards is dealing with these fault lines. So what you are seeing is a movement towards supporting migrants, is a movement towards ensuring that cash and PDS is available for informal workers. And third is that there is a linkage between the center and the states. And that's a very, very important opening.
So, Mr. Ahmed,
in the end,
how will this be spent? How will this be spent? Will there be certain milestones that the World Bank would be looking at?
That's exactly what I was trying to explain to you. We're not putting our money behind a scheme. We're putting our money behind a system that is stronger and can deal with migrants, of labor mobility, of greater strengthening of states and their ability to respond. So the example I was about to give you was in the NDMA, you have the State Disaster Response Fund. Today, money from the social protection system does not flow through this fund, but now it will. It will begin to get to states, and states will be able to use it to support migrants. States will be able to use it to address hotspots that may emerge as a result of releasing the lockdown, for example, in the health sector. So these are the mechanisms that we are trying to support. Most importantly, rather than have fragmented systems or schemes, and there are more than 400 such systems, schemes that underpin the social security system of India, is to create a coordinated system. So when you ask, where do we put our money in? We're putting our money in strengthening this system so it can actually put India on a path for a 21st century social protection system that not only deals with the crisis today, but deals with the urban reality, the mobility reality, the pan-national reality of a future India.
So Nirmala Sitharaman has announced one nation, one ration card, free food grain for all migrants for the next 2 months, extension of credit facilities for urban housing, street vendors, and an interest subvention scheme for small businesses as well. How do you see all of these measures in light of World Bank's push towards social security, not just for the rural poor, but for the urban poor as well?
I think that's precisely the point that I'm trying to make, that India today has a social security system that's predominantly rural focused. What India today needs is a system that's pan-national, that addresses both the rural reality as well as the urban reality. And in urban reality, one is talking about migrant workers, one is talking about workers in the unorganized sector, the informal sector. One is talking about a system where the center can offer block grants to the states, and the states can then use it to respond to the local needs. This is a far more comprehensive system of social security. And I think this is the watershed moment, because India is using the COVID crisis to to pivot and shift its social security system into what I think will be the foundations for a 21st century system that is pan-national, that protects all rural and urban citizens, that allows migrants to move, carry their benefits, one that mixes cash payments with in-kind payments. I think all of this has to come together as a system, not individual fragmented schemes. And what we're beginning to see government articulate is precisely that kind of a system, and that's what we're trying to support through our lending, is to create that kind of a system which is pan-national.
Okay. At the same time, Mr. Ahmed, the World Bank is also working for an economic stability package, especially for MSMEs. We've seen a series of announcements by the Finance Ministry, a 3 lakh crore collateral-free loans scheme for MSMEs, 20,000 crore as subordinate debt, 5,000 crore equity infusion as well, and expansion of the MSME definition. How do you see these measures?
I think in the overall logic of Government of India's response to COVID, it makes absolute appropriate measure in the overall context. To begin with, health, followed by social protection, and the third element is economic stabilization. And central to the economic stabilization is small and medium enterprises, micro, small and medium enterprises. Here there's a challenge. RBI and Government of India has created quite a bit of liquidity in the market. And then there are the capital markets, which offer even much greater liquidity. The challenge is to bring this liquidity into the hands of small, medium enterprises. And for that, you have to create the transmission mechanism. You have to strengthen the intermediation systems. And the intermediation systems are a combination of banks, NBFCs, housing finance corporations, MFIs. It's to bring these intermediaries into the liquidity so they can take the wholesale liquidity into the hands of MSME. And a pivotal element of this process are the guarantee systems or the de-risking systems, so that the intermediaries can take a risk in putting money in the MSME. Here I have to say that it's a delicate balance between stabilizing the MSME sector but ensuring its sustainability. It's not a social protection system that government is creating, but really trying to create a platform in which liquidity and credit can come into the hands of small and medium enterprise to stabilize their operations, and hopefully, as the economy takes off, to respond to the demand that would grow. It's that balance that needs to be made.
All right. So, do you feel that there is a risk associated with this economic package for MSMEs? Also, tell us about what the World Bank is planning as far as India's economic stability is concerned.
In terms of the investment, if you will, on the economic stabilization, I would say the greater risk is if you don't try to do something. Because if you don't try to do something now, you're going to have to do it in a much deeper way in the future. So interventions today make it easier to do interventions in the future. And I think that's a lesson that governments around the world have adopted. That's why you see in the United States 14% of GDP, why you see in Japan 21% of GDP, or Europe on average about 5 or 6% of GDP. Governments are intervening today in order to ensure the economy gets revived, but secondly, to protect citizens during this downturn, and third, to ensure that you don't have to increase significantly the interventions in the future. So the risk of not intervening is far higher than the risk of intervening. But there is one element that I think government needs to keep its focus on. When it comes to creating guarantee systems and bringing credit into the hands of economic entities, it's important that the economic entities also keep some skin in the game, that they actually, it's not 100% guarantee system. That's the balance between stabilization and sustainability in the future. This is not about a handout. This is not about a social protection system, but it's one of really supporting economic stabilization. We are right now in the middle of our discussions with government to understand where we can come in to support their programs on the MSME. I believe that where we think we can make a difference is strengthen the guarantee program, its operationalization, and the operationalization of the lines of credit that would come from entities like SIDBI and other wholesalers into the retail side. But we're in the middle of discussions with government on that.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Many thanks for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18.